Good evening, family, and welcome to How We Win. How We Win. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We have an amazing panel. We have amazing organizations coming together to talk about how we win, but also grounded in love for this week. This week marks the anniversary of the killing of Breonna Taylor, and we are going to spend the week spreading our love, our vision, our passion to all victims and all families who have victims of state-sponsored violence. And in that love and in that providing of comfort, we're going to talk about how we win and how we move forward. My name is Monifa Bandele. I sit on the policy table leadership team for the Movement for Black Lives. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm joined by an amazing co-facilitator, Shawnte West, who I'll have introduce herself, and then our panelists. And you're muted, Shawnte.
There we go. Okay. My name is Shawnte West, and I'm a social worker here in Louisville and with the Black Lives Matter Louisville chapter. I'm also an adjunct instructor at the University of Louisville in the Kent School of Social Work, teaching policy. So I'm really happy to be here today talking to our panel of policy analysts and Black community members. So what we're going to do, we're going to kick the night off. We're going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves so we know a little bit more about them. And so for each of the panelists, I would ask for you to give your name, your pronouns, where you're based or do your work, your organizational affiliation, and your role there. And then just briefly before we get started, give us a statement about why you think talking about policy is important to keeping Black people safe and how policy can help us win systemic change. And let's kick it off. We'll start with Keturah Herron.
Good evening. For some reason, I knew you were going to call on me first. It is with great honor and pleasure to be amongst such amazing and beautiful people as we come into the week to think about Breonna Taylor and the loss of her life and many other folks that we have lost due to police brutality. My name is Keturah Herron. I go by she, they, and I am a policy strategist at the ACLU of Kentucky. And I do most of my work locally here in Louisville, but also with a statewide lens. And I think that why policy is important is so many different reasons why policy is important. But when I talk to young kids about what policy is and what it means, is policy is the rules and the laws that we have to obey by. And so if we are not engaged as Black folks, or we're not creating policy that is going to make sure that is keeping Black folks safe, or that is grounded in Black liberation, then the Black community is going to continue to be disenfranchised, whether we're talking about the criminal legal system, healthcare, or education. And so for me, it's super important that we are all engaged in policy. And then the other thing, that one of the big things that I have been learning throughout the process, I'm probably maybe the baby of being engaged in policy, is that policy and politics are local. And so I know that a lot of times we think about policy on this bigger scale of what's happening across states or what's happening across the nation. But at the end of the day, the policies that, to me, in my opinion, that really matter is what is happening in our local jurisdictions, whether it's at the school board level or at the metro council or city level. And so those are the things that are directly impacting our lives on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things that I'm learning is that once we build that power locally, it's a lot easier to start going out in other jurisdictions in our areas to start building that power. And so that's what I will say for now, and I appreciate you all having me, and I look forward to the evening.
Thank you, Keturah. And I'll just go in my line of sight here. So the next person I have up is Mr. Sean Walton.
All right, can you all hear me? All right, good evening. Thank you all for having me. My name is Sean Walton, pronouns he, him, and I am with the law firm of Walton and Brown. I'm a partner, and I'm also a civil rights professor or adjunct professor at Capital University Law School here in Columbus, Ohio. Um, I am the family attorney for Casey Goodson Jr., a 23-year-old black man who was shot in the back and killed on December 4th, 2020. He was walking into his own home after leaving the dentist and stopping at Subway to pick up some sandwiches for his family. And as he entered his home, he was shot and killed in his back by a sheriff's deputy. And so Casey was a legal gun owner. And despite the fact that he was a legal gun owner and he lived a life where he tried to do everything that he could possible just to, do what he was told to do was the right thing, it still led to his death and his murder. And that happens far too often in this country where despite someone doing the right thing, or specifically with guns and black people, that black people that possess guns, whether legal or illegal, is viewed as a death sentence in this country. And that's been the case since the beginning of time. And so what Casey's death has led us to work on is Casey's Law. And it's something that ties together, unfortunately, many of the past cases that I have dealt with. And that is, we have to normalize the conversation around black people and guns, and we have to have equal protection under the Second Amendment. You know, if we're going to have a country where people can proudly, and white people can proudly walk down the street bearing arms and not have any fear in the world, then, we as black people should not have to worry about whether us exercising our right to carry a weapon will lead us to our death. So Casey's Law is meant to create a safer world for legal gun owners in this country. And although that transcends race, we know that disproportionately black people in this country are murdered when they possess a gun. So that's what I'm working on right now. And just in terms of, why it's important that policy is something that is really a priority for black people, is that, as we look back at like the civil rights movement of the past, we look at the 60s as a touch point in that civil rights movement because we had the Civil Rights Act. It wasn't that the civil rights movement, that the civil rights movement was only in the 1960s, but it was the 1964 Civil Rights Act that actually codified the fact that you could not discriminate against black people. And so as we move forward and we're in the current civil rights movement that we're in, we have to codify these wins, and we have to create a new standard where, although it's not going to solve everything, is going to create a new uniform standard where you cannot murder black people in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and then moving along, the next person I have is Duchess.
Good evening, everyone. I am Duchess, pronouns her, she, like the candy. I am the executive director of Organizing Black based in Baltimore, Maryland. And to answer the question that was raised about why is it important for policy and its connection to Black folk, is I'll be honest, as a community organizer and that being my entryway into the work, I didn't understand the importance of policy in terms of how we get the things that we are demanding for. And so now 13 years in organizing, I realized that it's important in terms of accountability. So we're talking about police misconduct. If we're talking about state-sanctioned violence and murders, we can't hold those institutions accountable without policies in place that are set to hold the law around how they are to engage with the community. And so in Baltimore, what we're trying to figure out is how we make sure that the community is the one involved in the policy that is set to determine how we engage or don't engage with the state.
Thank you. Okay, and then we have Puneet.
Hi, everyone. Honored to be here on this incredible panel with these incredible people and talking with you all this week during this anniversary. I'm with the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. I'm the manager of the Justice and Public Safety Project. My pronouns are she, her. And I lead our policy work on policing and public safety. So policy is important to me because policy and law are the rules that bind governmental actors, that draw the lines about what power and authority they have, and what the limits of that authority are, what lines they can't cross. And for the policies and laws that shape law enforcement, those lines can be drawn for both individual officers and what they do when they encounter individual people on the street, but also for entire agencies and cities, and can change the ways that our cities work, that how we govern, and what our social contract is. There's so many criminal laws on the books. So much ordinary activity is criminalized. But when people are arrested, it's a matter of officer discretion. And policies and law can bind how and when officers use or abuse their discretion. And pushing on low-level offenses, for example, in any community where Black people are often disproportionately arrested, can change the ways that communities are disproportionately criminalized, and end it. And for example, the city of Louisville put out a report recently admitting that Black people in Louisville are disproportionately being stopped and arrested, but it's not clear what they're being arrested for. And in Baltimore, people were getting arrested for playing dice. Casinos are open, but in Black communities, people are arrested for playing dice. And so city councils can repeal those ordinances. You can decriminalize and remove the criminal penalties. And even if city council isn't willing to repeal, a police department can issue a directive and say the harm from these arrests is just much greater than any benefit that was ever envisioned, and no officer shall make arrests for these offenses. Those are all policy solutions that can help craft the world we want to live in. And real policy change takes organizing, it takes campaigning, it takes pressure from people who know what they want and are going to be impacted by the changes. But policy can move us towards the world we want to live in.
Thank you. Okay, and then lastly, I'm going to throw it back to our facilitator, Monifa. If you could tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing, and specifically some information about the Breathe Act legislation and kind of your role in that.
Yeah, thank you, Shawnte. Thank you so much. I first want to say that no one piece of legislation is a silver bullet. There's no bill that's like a panacea that is like a way forward to end this whole criminal legal system and the mass incarceration we've suffered under. But we are fighting on every level, and we're making sure that our policy work is linked to our organizing work, that's linked to our litigation work, because we're fighting on each one of those levels. We are in the streets, we're in the courts, we're at City Hall, we're at the state capitol, or on Capitol Hill, because we're not just kind of fighting to win these individual pieces of policy. We're actually fighting to transform the entire system. We're fighting to actually dismantle the current criminal legal system as it is, that perpetuates patriarchal white supremacy, and rebuild a system of care, a real system of safety, a real system where people live free of harm. And so on the federal level, the Movement for Black Lives policy table has drafted the Breathe Act. And check it out, it's breatheact.org. We are looking at the highest level of government for there to be a divestment of federal funds into things like the COPS program, into things like the Burn Jag Grants program that funds prisons and jails and detention centers and police forces, and to stand up new grant programs that make sure people's housings are safe and affordable, that make sure that education is equitable, that makes sure that people have food security, make sure that people have access to mental health services and treatment services, all of the building blocks that we know really equal safety. And so think about all of the bills that everyone in this panel has talked about, not as individual one-offs against a system that perpetuates many, many violences against our people, but think of it as a chorus. Think of it as a coordinated offense that we're putting forth as a movement to stop the killing of Black people. right? It's not just about the winning the policy, it's where that's going to take us. That's why we put forth the Breathe Act. That's why we talk about defund the police, because on the flip side of that is about investing in Black people and in our communities and in real safety.
Okay, and that's great. The piece you talked about, all of us linking and tying in. So I think an important vocabulary for our audience to have is to talk about precedent as well and how we kind of build upon that. So I'm going to throw back to Keturah a little bit. If you want to talk a little bit more about Breonna's Law, the birth of that, and then how you've been able to branch out to other cities and states to kind of move that along in the protection of Black people and communities outside of Louisville.
Yeah, thank you. And I realized that everybody was talking about their policies, and that was the piece of the question that I missed. But when I found out about the murder of Breonna Taylor, literally I was on a phone call with about 30 folks, and people were talking about what they were going to do. And on that call, I said, you know what, I'm going to make sure that no-knock warrants are banned. I had no idea what that meant, what it looked like. And so it was a group of us that passed or helped pass legislation locally in Louisville to ban no-knock warrants, to say that the city of Louisville can no longer have no-knock warrants, that if the police need to go into someone's home, they need to make sure that they knock and announce themselves before they go into homes. And what we know about no-knock warrants is that that tactic and practice has been historically used on low-level drug offenders. And so because of that, we have seen not only Breonna Taylor, but many other folks across the nation who have been brutalized by this practice and tactic. And one thing that I think about when it comes to no-knocks is like, what is the risk and the award of what police are trying to do? But at the end of the day, it is to brutalize and attack our folks. And so we were able to pass Breonna's Law locally in Louisville. We did it in 17 days. It was a lot of folks who put work in to make that happen. And we did that on June 11th last year on 2020. And so since then, we have seen over 6 states put forth different versions of Breonna's Law. Here in Kentucky, we are still fighting to get Breonna's Law, House Bill 21, passed at the state level. And so, you know, I know that, like I said, there's been several folks like Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia actually just passed a statewide version of Breonna's Law. I think New York has a version of Breonna's Law. And then also other jurisdictions, different communities that are doing the same thing. And so that's where we are at today. And it's crazy because when that campaign started, when the No More No Knock campaign started, it literally was, I don't know what else to do but look at policy. And that was the policy that I knew that was most harmful and could have prohibited Breonna Taylor's murder. And so that is what we hit at. But also knowing and understanding now that is honestly, y'all, like banning no-knock warrants, that is a low level. That is low hanging fruit. And so when we see jurisdictions and our policy makers, our elected officials battling this conversation, like this shouldn't be a conversation. This is just something that needs to be done to make sure that we honor the legacy of Breonna Taylor. But for me, also getting to that qualified immunity and qualified immunity and making sure that police don't have those protections to make it impossible for them to be held accountable is the piece that that I feel like that we really need to be keeping our eyes on.
And I want to ask another question, and I'm going to throw it to Monifa. So Duchess brought up a part of the conversation about engaging the community in creating these policies. So to the panel in general, how can we work with our local legislators at the community level, at the statewide level, to create and enact policy? So for some of you who have done that, what does that look like as far as now I'm sitting here watching all of you who are very well versed, but if I'm not, I'm a concerned community member. What do I need to do to engage those legislators to start enacting some of the policies that we're concerned about?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, because when policies are designed without us at the very beginning of the inception, without making sure that people who are most impacted by those policies aren't right there at the table leading those solutions, they end up not doing what they are intended to do. You know, you can't kind of sit somewhere in City Hall or in the state capitol and design something for people who you know nothing about. So for everyone out there listening, it's like, you're a policymaker. You know, you need to insert yourself in the conversation about what things need to be designed to keep your community safe. Nobody else can dictate that for us. So, you know, one part is to definitely get involved in the places where we've had the biggest victories. We just passed a state level Breathe Act in Illinois, and it was led by an organization of people who were formerly incarcerated, called EAT, Equity and Transformation. And so they were able to not only make sure they put the pressure on the state legislators to pass the bill, but they made sure that the components of the bill really got at what people needed the most. You know, so everything from changing what is the various drug policies and things that are criminalized, to making sure that the investments are going where they should go. That's the only way we win. Getting plugged in is that you have to be coordinated with the organizations that are on the call. You know what I'm saying? You have to be connected with the local organizations. I can't remember. I think Duchess said all politics are local. Or was it Keturah? Keturah said it, right? All of this, all the conversations that we're having on a federal level in Capitol Hill won't mean anything if there's not also power being built on the local level, right? Because we know what happens. There could be major legislation passed in Congress, but if your police union is still has the ultimate power and say so what happens in that city, then, you know, forget what the law says, right? They got oversized budgets and outsized power. So we have to dismantle that power on the local level. So no policy initiative on the local level is too small. In fact, it's more important than the pieces. The pieces that are national get more press. They flashy, gets a lot of light, but the local work is where we're actually building the power that would even make the federal bills matter.
And as a follow-up, Mr. Walton, in Columbus, what does that look like in the midst of, you know, dealing with the family grieving and then, you know, hearing back from the community about what they want to change? How do we have those conversations? I think that Louisville experienced a little bit of that, a lot of that, last year with the death of Breonna Taylor, and then in the midst of grieving, struggling to create this change. So what does that look like? How do we do that respectfully of the family and engage them as well?
Yeah. You know, I appreciate that question, because one thing we don't consider enough is just how much these families are put through trauma. And, you know, they're not really given a chance to grieve all the time, because unfortunately they have to go into, just attack mode, because they are fighting for not only the legacy of their loved one, but, you know, trying to prevent this from happening in the future. And so in the wake of Casey Goodson's death, what we saw was that nobody could understand how a tragedy like this could happen, because from the very beginning, it was clear that Casey was not a suspect of any crime, and that something happened where this deputy made the decision to take Casey's life. And as the facts came out, what became clear was that he had to have seen Casey with the gun and assumed that Casey must have been committing a crime. And what rang out to so many people in the community was that this is not a new story. This is a story that here in Columbus, Henry Green, you know, can tell that story, and Tyree King and Deontay Bell and Julius Tate, and so many previous people who lost their lives because an officer was able to say that they saw a gun or thought they saw a gun, or, you know, in essence, that black person with that gun must have done something to deserve their death. And so, you know, as we're looking at the trauma that the families are facing, you know, there's a mix of, or a balance of allowing some time to pass, but also pushing that story while it is still in the light and it is still compelling, and there's still this interest convergence where you have folks paying attention and trying to figure out how to effectuate change. And so, with Casey's Law, the issue with Black people and guns is not a new issue. It's an issue that's been throughout the country, throughout time. But what needs to happen is that when a Black man is murdered, shot in his back 6 times walking to his own home, that has to be a touch point where we have policy changes where this does not continue to happen. So like Keturah said, qualified immunity must be attacked, and it must be dismantled because it is a cop-out, and essentially officers have mastered the art of getting away with murder. And so as we're looking at policy changes, we're changing qualified immunity. We're lifting up these stories and we're telling these stories, and we're allowing these legacies to protect us. Unfortunately, too many of these lost names and these lost people, these lost lives are now ancestors. But those ancestors are going to protect us going forward, and their stories are to be told. And through laws that protect us going forward throughout our existence in this country, will be protected.
And Duchess, what are your thoughts on the community engagement? What the group that you work with, what are some of the meetings like that you've had with your local legislators? Are you finding that they're receptive, and what has worked for you in the groups you work with?
With Organizing Black, we were in a unique position this summer because we were in the middle of a transition of mayorship. And so with our challenge to the defunding Baltimore Police Department, we were able to get the mayor who just came in to commit to cutting more funds from the police budget. So what we got to happen during the summer was a initial $22.5 million cut from the budget. And all that was community going out into the streets and attending a city hall meeting at the same time to express what their concerns and beliefs were about what we should be doing around the power that the Baltimore police have. I think that some of the important ways in which the community can engage is, one, like you said, finding an organization. And if the organization that you are hoping for or organizational home you are looking for does not exist, then I say you create one. I think the next step is to make sure that you are actively engaged in the meetings that are happening within your local offices. I know that sometimes that's a challenge because it seems like they have the meetings at a time in which, our community would be engaged at work or with their children. But if you can, attend those meetings. Some of the other ways that we at Organizing Black specifically have engaged is by having members on different the new mayor's task force. So that way the community voice is a part of what's happening in this new mayorship. I also think that the most important way that we are beginning to engage the community is with participatory governance. And so the idea that we, the people, are crafting what should be happening and not the actual legislators. And so that right now is the work that Organizing Black is doing to ensure that our concerns are being addressed and heard, and that the people have power in this process and not just us trying to sit at a table that wasn't designed for us.
You're on mute, Shawnte.
You would think I would get this by now. Okay, so I was throwing the question to Puneet. What are you hearing from some of the organizations that are asking for assistance around policy with the recent social justice uprisings? And how is it that organizations like yours help move policy conversations along?
Yeah, so we work with coalitions in 5 main cities in Tulsa, Oklahoma, North Charleston, South Carolina, in Baltimore, Maryland, in Ferguson, Missouri, and in New York. And in every city, the coalitions are different, and people are in different times of the work. But the two things I think that really connect the work that everyone is doing is both looking at the systems of accountability in the law enforcement agencies and figuring out what the obstacles are to those, whether it's in the police union contract, in the law enforcement bill of rights in the state, in the internal disciplinary processes. And also the second thing is, thinking more broadly about what public safety is and should be in their cities. And we support depending on what folks in each city need and are interested in having support with. We help review contracts. In Maryland, we're deeply involved in legislative advocacy to repeal the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights there, and the repeal has passed the Senate and is looking to pass the House soon. And we work with communities depending on what they're looking for. And in Charleston, South Carolina, there's been work on divesting from police and investing and looking at what officers are doing. What calls for service are they actually answering? What are they spending their time doing? So it depends, and there's a large spectrum of ways that communities can approach and look at how to change public safety.
And so you talked a little bit about the defund work. So I would ask this to all of the panelists. This was a special question I was asked to ask you all. So do you all believe that Harriet Tubman or Ida B. Wells would have supported increased funding to police departments? Can you name any legislators or people that Harriet would have at least pointed her gun at? We're not going to say shot because we don't want to get in trouble here. And we're peace-loving, responsible gun owners here. But what would some of our ancestors have thought about some of the defund work or working towards liberation through policy?
So if I can, I'll jump in just real quick. I'll say that I think our ancestors would be a bit astonished that in 2021 we are having to argue that slave catching should be defunded. And I'll just leave it at that because we know how this all started. And so it has to come to an end.
In the same vein, I said they'd be shocked that we're still putting people in cages, right? These were our abolitionists. And so I could hear them now calling on us to do the final chapter in abolishing, putting our folks in cages. The other thing I wanted to say about the firearm, having guns on Capitol Hill actually was a regular occurrence during the 1800s. They were always pulling out weapons on each other. So it's very interesting what Sean was talking about with the Second Amendment, which is that those types of rights never applied to us. They were never meant to apply to us. And so I think that our ancestors would also say, why are we continuing to prop up these systems and these structures that come right out of slavery? Like, why haven't we dismantled this and create something new that actually does include us in the rights and the privileges?
And that's so important. So I had a conversation with someone today. They were thanking, and if they're watching, they'll know I'm talking about them. So I apologize. But they were thanking our local Commonwealth's attorney specifically for dismissing charges against Kenny Walker, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, with prejudice. And I said, okay, am I missing something? Because that's his job. And I think that as Black people, we need to stop giving accolades and praise to people who just do their job. If you break an unjust law or you're breaking down an unjust system in your official capacity or role, that's something to celebrate. But I think that the celebration and accolades really go to the community members who forced those decisions to be made, who continue to show up, who continue to protest in the street and to say that these were things that matter to us. So, I'm hearing from all of you that it's really important that, we engage our elected officials, we engage people who are in positions of authority and power to enforce some of these policies to not only do their job, but think out of the box how we can move away from these systems that are so damaging to Black people. So I think that's an important part of the, conversation, that by pushing policy and new policy, we're telling people we're not okay with just what's on the books now, because that hasn't been able to protect us thus far to our satisfaction, because we're still being killed with these laws on the book. So I think, really, like Duchess, you spoke to, that's why it's so important to bring all facets of the community to the table, so they know what the experiences are across the community. We sitting here might be, considered some of the more privileged people. And so I've had a car for a while. I don't know what it's like not to have transportation. I haven't been incarcerated, so I don't know what that experience directly is about, to be able to speak to the needs of the people, who do represent that community. So, what are some other ways that the informed can help inform the rest of the community, the rest of us who policy is new to? How do we excite people?
Yeah, I would like to jump in. I think too, like going back to the other question, I know for sure that that the community that our ancestors envisioned, this wasn't it. And I think that we have as a people have somehow got a little bit comfortable with where things are. But I think that it's also our jobs to educate people. We have to educate people about what it means to be engaged, what it looks like. We have to give folks access to that. And I would even go as far as saying is that we have to make sure that policy is a part of our education system. Like we don't even do like a civics anymore. I know that in Kentucky, we don't even talk about the different levels of government anymore. And so what does that look like if it's not going to be in our school systems? How do we incorporate that into our everyday activities? I know that last year COVID kind of threw us all for a loop, but we specifically as a Black community, we are constantly getting together, whether it's church picnics or family reunions, or we have these different festivals or whatever in our communities. And so I think that it's also our duties to make sure that this education piece about policy and what it means to be engaged is actually a part of everything that we do. Like, how do we make that a part of our culture, and make it a fun and like now is the time. And I think that what's so exciting to me is that what we saw last year in 2020 with so many people being engaged, that was the work that been happening for years and years since Trayvon Martin and Michaela Brown. But now, like, how do we really capitalize on that? And I think it's just a matter of us being super intentional of saying, like, this is a part of like everyday thing. Like, this is a part of dinner conversations or, whatever it is. We just have to make it a part of our culture of like, this is it. The same way we talk about being spiritually grounded or eating healthy or whatever it is, like this needs to be a part of our just culture. And I think that would help us, teach and make sure that we're starting with the babies.
So I would like to add to that. I would want to start by saying that we, the people, have to think of ourselves as craftsmen. And so one of the sayings that we have at Organizing Black is that we are practitioners of a world that does not yet exist, and that we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. And so we already know the answer to the original question about whether or not Ida B. Wells or Harriet Tubman would be pleased with where we are right now. The answer is no, right? But now is the time for us to be craftsmen and use the skills that we have, whether that's gathering the community together or writing policy, to make sure that we are crafting the world that we want to see. And so I think for me as a community organizer, political education is a key proponent to the work that we do, but also making it fun and engaging and meeting people where they are, right? So I know that I am privileged to have a car, to have a job, to have a home, and to keep that in mind when we're thinking about where we hosting our next town hall, where we have in the political education? Is it accessible online? Is it, do we have translators, making it so that the people in the communities that we serve have access to the education that we're referring to, but also remembering that we as organizers should be student teachers. And while we have a lot to give, the community also has a lot to teach us. And so making sure that we create space for the community to actually share their thoughts and experiences with us, and not us just throwing word garbage into the community when they are the ones that have the power and the experience to shape the things that we are going into the world to shape for them, right? So like we as organizers and community activists and policy analysts should be working for the community, not the other way around. And so I think that we should keep that in mind, and also encourage the community or remind them that they have the power. They already have access to the language and to the spaces. They just need to, be more engaged. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to be an organizer. You don't have to be a lawyer. Your experience as an everyday person, whatever that experience is enough to move policy and to move policy into action.
That's excellent. And I would liken that to, so we took a trip, some of the organizers, last week to Cincinnati. And one of the people that came with us was on our cooking team. And so we had different meals, over the weekend, like over the course of 3 days. And I will say this about myself. I'm one of those like type A people, if you couldn't tell. And so we were cooking and I said, I'm going to be your sous chef. And I kind of see, that as kind of our role. And so one of the things, I went out and bought some potatoes, and I thought we had to get a certain kind of potatoes and peel them. And I started going at it. She said, girl, give me those potatoes. You don't even need to do all that. Let me do this, and cut it up. And I had to let it go, because while I cook all right, she's the cook. And who am I to argue with the cook, but to do what she says to get dinner done? And I think that's kind of where we're at as a community as far as policy, that we need to let people be experts of what they are experts of, and not try to teach ourselves to speak for them all the time. It's okay to let people come to the table and share their own experiences if it's not in the language that we're used to, if it's not in the language that people are comfortable with. I say I can't be a politician. I can't stop cussing. I've done good tonight, but that's not my ministry. So I
wanted to add to that too, because Duchess really inspired me to think about one of the most powerful things I saw last summer. Wasn't coordinated a part of the demonstration that we were having in downtown Brooklyn. But the NYPD would do the thing where they would kettle us and then arrest people. They block you in, and then the curfew came, and then, arrest everybody. And it was too many people for like the paddy wagons and the squad cars. So they had commandeered the buses from the MTA, right? But, they can't drive MTA buses. So what did the bus drivers do? The bus drivers refused to carry the protesters to central booking. They stood in their power. Watching them, I always cry when I talk about it, watching them step off the buses and then see them tweet out a statement, moments later saying that we were for the people. We carry the people to and from work. We are not the NYPD. And so it's just in that moment, they stood in their power and played like the most pivotal role in the protests in that moment. But this was their lane. You know what I'm saying, Shawnte? Like you said, the bus drivers were like, guess who can't drive the bus? The police. And so nobody's going to jail today. And I thought it was a beautiful example of how people stand in their power and exert the power that they have towards our common mission.
And so with that said, I think we're all saying that policy is everybody's job. Duchess said again, and we've all said, you don't have to be what people consider book smart. You don't have to necessarily be connected to an organization. It's good for us to be connected, but you can sit in the city council meetings by yourself. You can share that with your family, your next door neighbors, and community members. So, just going back to what Keturah said, we're building a community of people who are intentionally concerned about the laws and policies that impact us as Black people. And so what are some other policies that we should be paying attention to right now as Black people?
I'll go ahead and jump in. Here in Ohio, I'm a board member for the Ohio Association for Justice, the plaintiffs' attorneys in the state. And we've prioritized through our civil rights section, which I chair, statewide body cameras. And so, as we're talking about low-hanging fruit and stuff that just makes basic sense, it defies logic to me that in 2021, with all of our technological advances in this country, that every officer does not have a body camera. And so that's just a financial piece. That's all it comes down to, is a financial commitment from this country that after all of the police violence that Black and brown people have endured in this country, and that as it continues on, and last summer, all the promises that were made in the wake of Breonna's death and George Floyd's death, that, we can have that evidence in court. Because sadly, as we know, Black people do not have our stories believed in this country, and this country has to believe our truths. I look back at Walter Scott in South Carolina, and how the officer claimed that, I believe he tried to take his gun or his taser, but a cell phone or a bystander with a cell phone captured that and saw that lie. How often do we see the lies that are not caught on camera? So I see no reason why we should not be pushing for policies where officers throughout this country have to wear body cameras, and that the federal government puts money behind that, and state governments put money behind that. So that's one policy initiative that I think just makes common sense and should really just be a financial push. Let's make that happen, because if you're not going to believe us, believe what the camera shows at the very least.
I want to lovingly push back on the body cam policy demand just a little bit, because I think that it is very important that we have independent and video, something that you cannot dispute, that shows what happened in any situation. But our experience has been in some of the other states, and hopefully as y'all get closer to passing your policy in Ohio, you consider some things like who controls when the camera is on and off? Where does the footage go once it's been captured? Who has, are they mandated to release it by a certain period of time? And does it increase the police budget to bring this equipment into the police department or into the state police? Again, working kind of against the defund movement. What we found is that when police have body cams like they do in the NYPD, and they have control of when they turn it on and off, they have control of the footage, it's not an independent third party, that they actually use that footage to edit a story and to string videos together to tell their narrative. It's not like when us at Cop Watchers, but the brother in Walter Scott was a cop watcher, like many folks in our cities, we're catching the footage. When they're capturing the footage, they tend to manipulate the footage. They tend to hold on to the footage. And so I would just caution against just a push for a budget allotment for them to have more cameras, because they also use them for surveillance in communities. So now when you're walking through a building or you're talking to people on the street, they don't know they're also under surveillance. I just wanted to throw those things out there about that particular policy demand.
And for sure, and that's not a pushback, that's a supplement, because, had I did a deep dive and kept going, definitely I agree 100%. Here in Columbus, we do have a policy of body camera footage, and Andre Hill was killed December 2020, right after Casey, and the officer did not cut his body camera on until afterwards. And, those issues are all there. I agree 100%. It shouldn't be controlled by the police, and, it should be reviewed by a third party. I say that proposal from the standpoint of we need deterrence. And so as we're looking at deterrence that save lives, I think that's something that we should explore. But again, it's not a pushback, because I agree completely that it can be used against us. As an attorney, I've seen it used against us. So I'm with you, Monifa. We're on the same page, and that's how we build, is that we push back and we come together.
And I love that conversation that you all are having. So that's how we learn with policy. Again, talking about precedent and what has happened in other places. And I'll kind of throw to you again, Monifa. Louisville is currently, or Louisville, West Louisville is dealing with some legislation about tax increment financing coming up. And so we have about 7 days left in our legislative session this year. And I believe the proposal was introduced maybe with 13 days left in the legislative session without community input. And so if all of you can kind of talk, the conversation we've been having is, it seems good on the surface. The bill would provide 80 cents on the dollar above the current property tax revenues for 2020. And return that money above and beyond this year's level to West Louisville, which is primarily African American. And so some of the issues that we're having is who is on the board that spends the money? How do we decide who is on the board? What happens after the TIF timeframe is up? And so if all of you can kind of speak, when you're looking at policy, how do we as community members look for covert entries into that legislation and kind of protect our communities about those? Are there specific questions we need to be asking, things we need to look for in general? How does that go when things seem good on the surface?
You know how the older people used to always tell us the devil is in the details? I used to be like, what does that even mean? But when you're doing policy work, I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. You really have to sit with that bill and think about all of the ways that the very, very powerful police departments and police unions could work around what it's intended to do. And so making sure that you build into the legislation some type of ongoing evaluation so that even if you don't catch it at the top, you're catching it at the 1 year mark, you're catching it at the 6 month mark or the 2 year mark. And if that policy is not achieving what it is designed to do, you have an opportunity to recalibrate. I mean, these bills are very complicated, you know. And also, what are the budget pieces? So you're talking about a tax increase that almost feels like maybe like a reparations bill. I mean, that's what I'm getting from the thing, right? So my thing is like, you know, we have a reparations toolkit that says all of the pieces and components of a piece of legislation that meets the reparations requirement. And one of it is the money that's going over to the West Side. Have folks in the West Side already determined where that money's going to be used, who's going to be the decision-making body for where that money's going? You know, those types of details are where we have to step in and demand some transparency.
Okay. And so are there any thoughts on the George Floyd and Public Safety Act? Do you all feel that that legislation has gone far enough to do some of the work that you guys have suggested here tonight as far as keeping the community safe? And then as a add-on to that question, do you think this legislation or anything that's come up recently would have saved George Floyd?
So I can start with this one. The George Floyd Justice and Public Safety Act it's a bill that mostly and critically addresses some key obstacles to accountability when officers commit misconduct, violate policy, commit excessive force. And it does break down some barriers to accountability, like removing qualified immunity for all law enforcement officers. And it has limits for when officers can use force that, of course, need to be, it takes local communities to hold officers accountable. No law can, alone change what happens on the ground. We have a 14th Amendment. As Monifa said, it takes power from communities. But the bill does do some really important things on accountability and on force. And it has some data requirements for officer activity. So local communities can know what officers are actually doing, because so much of law enforcement activity isn't always even documented. So we have to know what officers are doing in order to hold them accountable. But data isn't an end in itself. It's a tool that communities can use to show what they want to change, and to prove that change needs to happen. But to the second question of this, George Floyd died because officers responded to a call for service about a $20 bill. And this is the bill about accountability. It's about after an officer has committed misconduct. It's after an officer has used force, or even the moment before they use force, but the interaction's already happened. And changing the material conditions of life for Black people takes more than a singular bill, takes more than any singular bill. And there's no one bill that can do everything. But this bill does have some important accountability tools, like ending qualified immunity, and it would prevent the officers who killed George Floyd from using qualified immunity as a defense if and when they are sued by George Floyd's family. So I'll stop there.
Okay, so I hear you saying no, and I do appreciate your answer. And so that is saying that there's work for everybody. Is that what I'm hearing? Because there's no one piece of legislation that's going to keep us safe. So we need everybody out there watching, everybody on the panel, our grandparents and ancestors to speak to us, to tell us how we need to move forward. So with that said, what do you all feel are next steps for the community as far as policy? I heard Keturah speak to community education. And so if we're educating the community, what does that look like? And how can, for example, your organizations be instrumental in providing that education?
I'm going to jump in real quick and kind of answer that last question and this question. I know here in Kentucky, we've seen this legislative session, we've seen 3 anti-protesting bills, one that is really moving. And so when we talk about, we're trying to talk about, okay, what's some of this proactive policy that we can put forth to help keep us safe. People also need to be aware and know that, like, we might have like 3 or 4 different policy ideas that we're like, oh, these are the things that's going to keep us safe. But we also know that the opposition is coming with like 10 times, 20 times more things to keep us oppressed. And so it is super important that we stay engaged. One of the anti-protest bills here, Senate Bill 211, actually also has a clause in it that basically is trying to prohibit local jurisdictions from defunding the police. And so I say that to say also the work that we're doing, we are winning and they are scared, right? And so it's one of those situations where it's a both and that they see us coming and they see that we're serious about it, but they are also coming harder and quicker as well. And so that's kind of the contradiction of the work. But I think as far as the education, I already here in Louisville, the weather is starting to break and we have people out in the streets already. And so we have to be very intentional of getting the people out in the streets, getting them educated and armed with all the information that they need, whether it's about keeping themselves safe in the moments of protesting, or making sure that when they are out there that they are attaching it to some type of policy and what this means for the long game, that we need bodies, and that this work not only on the policy side, but what does that mean for our mental and physical health and the trauma that we are enduring, and what does that mean for the long run? And so I also think that there is this larger, wider conversation of not just talking about the policy as itself as policy, but what does it look like to sustain ourselves for the long term? Because I feel like that our generation right now, I'm not going to say we're just now getting started, but I think the heat has been turned up in a different way than any of us have ever seen.
That's excellent. And I appreciate you speaking to, self-care and organizing as well. People ask me a lot, I'm a social worker. Why do I care about policy? Well, policy impacts the communities and the people that I work with. So we talk about it on a micro, meso, and macro level, that we need to understand how to advocate for our communities on any of those levels where it's needed. And that we educate according to what the people people tell us. So I think I really appreciate Black Lives Matters in Louisville specifically reaching out and addressing across all of those spectrums the needs of Black people to be able to sustain themselves to even do the work and be aware and awoke enough to take in the information that we're trying to share. So what does education look like in your communities, Duchess or Sean? What are some organizations doing to try to educate the people more on how they can be engaged in policy work or just advocacy?
So some of the main way right now that folks are being educated are through online town halls. And I know that shift will happen once it gets warm again, where folks can be out. You don't have to be in the house and sitting online to get the things that you need. I think one of the things that is important when we are doing the education work is to keep in mind, one, that we have to dissect the bill that's 136 pages, right? And put it into bite-sized, digestible information for folks. Because it's a lot for organizers to take in. It's a lot for policy analysts to take in. So it's going to be a lot for the community to take in as well, but making sure that they get the pieces that are important. I also think that we need to think about how we are meeting folks' needs when we are doing the education piece. So we can't just ask folks who just worked 16 hours to come to some town hall and not provide some basic mutual aid services to make sure that their needs are being met, while we're also feeding them and arming them with the information they need to be able to engage in this process of making sure that we create a world that is better for us.
Awesome.
I'll go ahead and jump in, and I'll keep it brief because I'll be honest. I mean, I think that's a space that here in Ohio we can probably improve in. So I'm not going to sit here and say that we're doing great things in terms of informing the public. I think that a lot of times we operate in silos where attorneys are digging into the law and then working with organizers, and organizers are educating the folks within the organization. But as far as like a public education standpoint, we need to do better and do more, just because policies are being proposed and legislation, and we're not always talking about that. And it's not often, and I'll be honest in that. We're very reactionary, and that's just natural, I think, with people. But as we go forward, there's a need to be proactive in this. And I'll just say that on the self-care piece, I think that's really just the balance that we, try to find. And even for myself, because I want to do everything, right? I want to try to communicate the things I know about what's happening with legislation and what's happening on the legal side with qualified immunity and then with the cases, but we can't do it all, right? So we have to try to figure out how to mobilize more people to pick up in the spaces where we can't, because self-care is important. I'm finding that out recently more than ever, that after years of doing this work, like there is some trauma that you internalize that you don't even realize that you're dealing with. And so as we, talk about what's next, I agree, like self-care is next and ongoing, and also building a movement of people that can help share the work and share the pain as we share these wins together.
I want to jump in too, if I can. So I think that another key thing is that there are a lot of resources out there. There are folks out there who want to support this work and have created toolkits. So for everyone who's listening, LDF has a toolkit on police union contracts that can help identify what are the provisions of your contract that might be problematic. So if you want to take a look at your contract, it has links to over 100 contracts nationwide, and it highlights the provisions that are often problematic that we saw in the vast majority of them, and ways that you can try to negotiate with your local city council folks and other local decision makers to either remove the provisions that impede accountability or other solutions. And we're available as well as a resource. And there are a lot of folks who have been working on this and have created tools and resources that are out there. And I think, as everyone's been saying, we have to do this work together. We're all going to lean on each other. And as you jump in, there's going to be lots of folks to support you as well.
Thank you. Okay, and just I appreciate you all being here today. And so we're getting close to our time to kind of wrap today. So just as a final question to everyone, and I'll kind of back up and we'll start with Puneet and go back around. So considering the context of today's discussion about policy, how do you feel that we can win moving forward?
So I think some of the key elements of that are to make sure that we are centering and listening to families of families of those who have been brutalized, and really taking the leadership of folks who are most impacted, as well as building the power of the communities, even as we try to think of the specific policy goals that may address the problems in our community, but also how are we building the power to make sure that even after the policy win, that the community can make sure that it's being enforced, that whatever law we get, that it's actually being complied with, and that after that law, whatever problem is next can also be addressed, building on the power that's won through the building of the coalition and policy goals that you're working with right now. So I think thinking of it as a longer term project with longer term goals that ultimately build the power of our communities, and keeping it going.
Thank you. And Duchess, I have you up next.
So my answer to that question is short and simple as an organizer. The answer is people power. And so we have to make sure that we are reminding the people that they have the power to make the change that they want to see. It's not about building the power, it's already there. We just have to tap in to the source, whether that's ourselves, the community, or creating a larger community, because sometimes, like Sean said, we are operating in silos, to move the work forward and to get it done, whether that is policy ask or all the way up to actual abolition, to make sure that we are using the power of the people, and again, centering those who are directly impacted, to make sure that that is happening.
And I'll switch to Sean, and Monifa will have you wrap up for us.
All right. I'll just keep it brief as well. I think that we have to stay aggressive and keep our feet on their necks, period. Because, as we look at last year, and there was just this big push again last summer where the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act was proposed, right? And then it sat, and, corporations that had pledged their support, and, just general folks that felt like they had a racial awakening, they didn't keep, pushing, and they didn't feel that pressure because, the folks just felt like, okay, we've achieved and we're winning, and that's enough. And I think anybody that's done this work knows that it's going to be a marathon. It's going to, continue going, but we have to stay aggressive. We have to, not let up. We have to support each other, and we have to work together. So I think, we're doing the right things, but obviously folks are still dying. And so until folks stop dying, we have to keep going and keep pushing and stay in this thing together.
Thank you. And Keturah?
I think the other panelists have said everything well as far as what it's going to take. But, I also would like to lift up and let people know that right now we are winning. And so it's a matter of we do, in the midst of all of the toughness and the trauma that we're dealing with, we have to make sure that we are understanding what joy means for us as individuals and collectively, and celebrate those moments, but also know that we have to keep going and keep pushing. And so I will say right now that we are winning, and it's just a matter of we just have to keep going and looking at what does this mean for the future and the long-term fight.
And Monifa?
Yeah, thank you, Keturah. I mean, that is doubling down on the fact that we are winning. Look at the resources that are out there. I just want to shout out a couple more resources, which is defundthepolice.org, which just launched last week. Lots of tools on there. Definitely shout out the LDF tools, but also check out breatheact.org and check out m4bl.org to check out the our Invest Divest platform, which is the our national policy platform, right? Vision for Black Lives. I almost forgot the name of it. Check out the Vision for Black Lives, which we wrote 5 years ago and then was recently relaunched. So the tools are there. How we win is that we got to read the room, right? The time is now, and our folks have created the conditions to bring us to where we are today, right? People took to the streets, 25, 26 million folks, in the face of a pandemic, in the face of armed police, in the face of armed white supremacists, to create a condition for those of us that fight for policy in this day right now, don't pass weak, soft-targeted policies, right? This is a once in a century opportunity to actually transform systems. This is an opportunity for us to demand so much more than we've ever been able to do in our lifetimes. I think Keturah was absolutely right at the top of the panel, right? This is a very unique moment. Sometimes when you're in it, it's hard to see that you're right there on the edge, that you're winning. But when we look back at this moment, it's going to be pre-2020 and post-2020, right? We're in that now. We are building the future. We are winning. And if we can just see that, we can hold on to that, we can know that, like Duchess said, we are the architects of a world that doesn't exist anymore, as her organization has as its motto, then we can push forward, use these policies. Nothing's wrong with any of the bills that we talked about, but we actually are building so much more than that.
Awesome. And I don't have anything better to say than that. So I appreciate all of you panelists. You've been very informative, and I'm sure that you have sparked some brains and some people to want to get involved in policy making and made them feel comfortable that they can do it, that they're welcome to do it, that there's an expectation of the ancestors that we carry this forth in this way. We have a lot of intelligent Black people, whether they're street smart, they're book smart, they're smart in their own way. And so we get together, we can all do this. We have the momentum, as Keturah said, we're already winning. Let's keep it going. And so please visit Black Lives Matters Louisville for more information. We'll continue to have sessions like this. We'll continue to work in partnership. There's groups that we're working together. You know, Keturah and I and several other people are going throughout the state of Kentucky to share our policy struggles, the things we've learned, the things we need to know with people throughout the state. And so hopefully wherever you're watching, you could do the same in your community, in your state, and we could build together nationally like we did tonight. So thank you so much for everybody being here. And please reach out in the chat, anybody watching, if you have any questions about our panelists, and we'll be sure to try to provide that information to you. So thank you so much, and everybody have a Blacktastic rest of the day and the rest of the week, all right? And we're out. 2 minutes early, perfect.